Hey there. Hello, everybody. This is Jay Frost speaking to you from London. And unfortunately, today I can't be in the same room with my guest, but at least we're speaking from close to the same time zone, which wasn't true a few weeks ago. And that is Jane Park. And I'm going to introduce her to you in just a moment. But first, I want to welcome you to the room. Thank my producer, Jack, for getting us set up in the last few minutes. It's always a little challenging when we're operating in 3 different countries. So thank you, Jack, for getting us going. I want to welcome all of you here and encourage your participation. And that means that we have, of course, the chat. And you saw those slides. That means we want to say hello. And thank you, Melissa, for opening up the chat from North Carolina. So nice to see you here. Everybody else, just join Melissa in saying howdy if you would. Don't have to literally say howdy, but whatever you'd like to say in order to make sure that that our guest today knows that you're here, maybe where you're from, and all that sort of thing. And then additionally, we have the Q&A. You know exactly what that means. I don't have to define it for you, but I do want to encourage you to use it. Sometimes we miss a question in the chat. We don't want to miss your questions. So please, if you're fired up and ready to go with a question, I hope you use the Q&A, and otherwise use the chat as a great place to play. And with that, I want to get underway. But of course, the last thing I should do before I do that is to thank DonorSearch for allowing me to have these great conversations with people like Jane Park, who I've known for a long time, always virtually, which is the strangest part, but so grateful that she can be here and be a part of now what are now 500 plus conversations, but learning so much from her along the way and over the years. Jane is many things, and if you know her background, you may know this, but I'll give you just a thimbleful. She is currently the head of fundraising at Catalyst 2030. Out of Germany, and we'll be hearing more about Catalyst 2030 in a few minutes. Also a doctoral researcher at the Otto Bashheim School of Management. In the past, you may know her work through Global Philanthropic, also not only her consulting, but maybe her writing work. You may be familiar with a certain book of hers that she talked about recently on LinkedIn that I had the pleasure of being a small contributor to, and also at LSE, and way back at Wolf Trap, which is physically the closest I've probably ever been to Jane, since I also live, when I'm not in places like this, in Northern Virginia. So with that, Jane, thank you so much for hanging out today.
It's such a pleasure. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, same here. We were talking about having this a few weeks ago, and I'm glad we waited. We have a lot to talk about, and I'm trying to figure out where to start. We gave this huge kind of topic area to explore, which is after the disruption, returning to work, navigating the transition, and driving systems change. And first, I love definitions. And if you don't mind, let's talk a little bit about disruption, because there are lots of forms of it, both what happens to us as well as what we are doing to make good change. And you've been through, I know, a number of different disruptions in your life, which I'm sure have allowed you lots of great opportunities to do really exciting things. So when you were thinking about how to describe what we're going to talk about today and disruption came to you, what kinds of disruptions were coming to mind?
Yeah, I mean, there are multiple ones I think that people just experience in life. I think probably the biggest one, maybe in the whole fundraising philanthropy context, was moving countries. And I did that several times. The first big one was to the UK from the US. But I continued fundraising as a fundraiser at the LSE, as you mentioned. And then I found maybe a surprisingly big one was moving from the UK to Germany. And I guess encountering and exploring the philanthropy market or the fundraising market here. So I think that was probably the first one, trying, navigating a new culture in that context, building a new network there, and understanding how fundraising is viewed and regarded culturally, as well as in the professional context. So I'd say that was probably the primary first one that I often think of. And then, of course, all the personal ones, like having multiple children and moving, including moving internationally. And I think the one that unifies us all is the pandemic, and navigating that one.
Yeah, it's funny because here in London, of course, all masks are off. I think everybody thinks we're done with that thing, and yet in the news, you can see it percolating to the surface, new variants, not just of COVID, but all the things that we kind of avoided when we were all avoiding one another there for a pretty big period of time. Is that true in Germany too? I mean, where are we with the pandemic and with how people are relating to one another post-pandemic, if that's what the era that we are in?
I mean, I think it's more or less the same. I just flew in through London, and it seemed the same as flying into Düsseldorf, and being in Dulles was pretty much the same too. I think in terms of relating with each other, I find that we're figuring that out still. I think that we've embraced being able to do more virtually. I'm really grateful, particularly because there are just more opportunities, I think, as a professional, and as a volunteer, that I'm no longer, I think now I can be entertained as a fundraiser or as a volunteer. There's a place for me, whereas I think before, just the conception of that was really out there. So I think that's a welcome change. But then we're also finding, say at Catalyst 2030, we're a global network. So of course, all of this connectivity that we can do virtually is critical. But then we're also finding that people just don't have the same appetite to be on webinars all day, or just even once a month. So I think figuring out the right balance is where we are now.
It's hard, and it's not like we haven't been through that kind of challenge before, where we're trying to figure out what kind of content, information, engagement we want to have or absorb. We've done it all throughout our lives, whether it was with different digital devices or television or cable, and all those things seem kind of antiquated now, but we're still using them. It's sort of like print media. I still remember people talking about how it was the death of books, maybe 30 years ago. And of course, we still have books, but it doesn't mean that we all read the same way or read the same things. And I suppose we're going to experience that change, not just in fundraising, but in the work that we do at our organizations, trying to figure out how to communicate with one another in a way that we're willing to do, since maybe we don't want more than one webinar a month. I'm doing 2 a week. So I don't, maybe I'm trying people's patience, but at least we get to talk with people like you. So that's the reason we do it. But it's hard. And there's a lot of, another part of this title was about returning, and returning to work is another feature of this. So whether it's Germany we're talking about, or the organization at Catalyst, or whether it's just the other organizations throughout your life, what does it mean to return to work at this point? I mean, are people going back to are you in an office?
No, I'm not. We at Catalyst work entirely remotely. So we're a Haarlem, that's Haarlem with 2 A's, in the Netherlands based organization. But that's a headquarter, that's an address. Our founder, one of our founders, happens to live there, and so I think that maybe as a natural result, maybe about 1/4 to 1/3 of my colleagues are based in the Netherlands, primarily Amsterdam. So they meet once a week in a physical office, which is great. I mean, I have to say that I have the good fortune to only be about 3.5 hours away. So I was able to meet with them there as well. But I mean, we're otherwise all over the world. So in other parts of continental Europe, a lot of colleagues in Africa, a few in Asia, and maybe a small handful in the Americas. So I don't
Okay.
think I've left anybody out, but yeah, we have one colleague in Australia even.
And there's a lot we're going to talk about, but I realize I haven't allowed you a chance to talk about what is Catalyst 2030, and so it would help people understand how you're working globally too.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So Catalyst 2030 is a network of social innovators, and it was founded over 3 years ago by experienced social entrepreneurs who realized we're really not on track to meeting the UN SDGs by 2030. And there are several reasons, several problems that are blocking the way. And one is that social innovators, those who are working on the ground, who understand the problems, particularly in the global south, are working in siloed ways, and their voices aren't being heard. And in fact, a lot of these global agendas are top-down driven and global north led, and that shift in the narrative and in the paradigm really needs to change in order for us to change the way that we're working. And so the systems change approach has become really it was founded, the movement was founded based on this belief and understanding that we really need to adopt it in order for us to have a chance at actually disrupting the way we've been doing things and reaching our goals. So that's all to say that we're about 3 years old. We are growing exponentially. We have over 2,500 organizational members, over 3,700 individual members. We represent this number, I'm not 100% sure, 75 countries, I believe, but we have chapters, official established chapters in 45 countries. So what that means is that we have more than at least a couple of members who are wanting and willing to get together on a regular basis to address the issues that are most salient to those countries, really echoing our belief that we really need to be following local proximate leaders in setting the agenda and finding solutions to our global problems. And we facilitate collaborations across sectors, across themes, across geographical boundaries, and we're incubating or fostering about 140 in total.
There's so much to ask about in there, but when you talked about kind of this realization that the social innovators, social entrepreneurs weren't either didn't have the opportunity or weren't availing themselves the opportunity to get together and address the SDGs, strategic development goals, right? And first of all, okay. So there are a couple of things in there. First, 3 years ago also was when we started dealing with this whole pandemic.
The organization was born
right
at the start. Mm-hmm.
So was that a coincidence or was that recognition?
I think the actual launch of the founding of the organization was coincidental. So it started just at the start of the pandemic, but the idea had been in the works.
Right. But what a coincidence, because of course, if we had different ways of dealing with what we all confronted collectively, especially in the global South, with regard to the availability of vaccines, for example, or even advocacy for vaccines for that matter, not just the vaccines themselves. I can imagine that maybe we've had different outcomes. Even here in London, one of the things that really struck me is in the United States, we had for a short time a whole bunch of little flags somewhere in DC to reflect all the people who were lost to the pandemic. All those little flags are gone. In London, there's that long wall that I know that you have seen with hearts, memorializing all the people that were lost in the UK, where people are going up and writing the names on them. It's more like the quilt was for AIDS years ago, for those who remember that. Very personalized, letting people, honor those who were lost. But we aren't even talking about all those people who were, collectively talking about all the people who were lost in the South through this experience. And I can imagine if there were mechanisms like, of course, yours, that these outcomes hopefully would have been different. But it also begs the question, as you all have been working on this, are the SDGs themselves, were they top down or were they reflection, were they bottom up? That's a horrible mechanism, but you know what I mean, where they reflective of people's actual needs are at the community level all around the world.
I mean, I think that the spirit of where they come from, I mean, I mean, these are iterations, right, of previous previous UN goals, and I think that they are, and I have to admit some limited knowledge on their origins and how they were drafted. I mean, I have a few ideas of who wrote them and things of that nature. And I mean, I do believe that they were based on real expertise and knowledge. However, I don't think that the lived experience of those in the global South, I don't think that they're necessarily part of the agendas per se. I mean, I think that the goals do meet the needs and reflect the problems, but it really is in terms of the solutions where that we have this gap.
Right.
And I think that
oh, please go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that it's just when I talk about siloed ways of working, I'm talking about various social entrepreneurs working in their own silos who could accelerate if they could work with each other more easily, if there would be a more natural way of facilitating that, which we're hoping to, which we're fulfilling. And there's also the silo of not working so easily with policymakers or governments, as well as the private sector. So, and we have funders as well as part of within our network. So that's also what we're facilitating and trying to change. And if we're talking about philanthropy in particular, this is something, this is a pillar that we're also trying to address, in that it is very top-down driven. I mean, there is a very fixed way of how philanthropy works, how giving works, how applying to a foundation works. That is largely prohibitive, actually. I mean, you need to have staff, knowledge, wherewithal, time, that sort of capacity in order to apply to most foundations. And there is something, if we stopped and thought about it, instead of frantically chased these opportunities that may and often do not work out. I mean, it is a bit odd that we're competing with each other when actually it would be to everybody's benefit if we actually worked together to solve the similar or same problems. And, if we got foundations to leverage their funding more by partnering with each other, by eliminating the burdensome way of applying, and by providing access to their networks and expertise for other things.
Biggest, hardest question to answer, why are we competing? I mean, as you said, there are lots of things we can do collaboratively to make things better, maybe even help one another as organizations. So why all the competition?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there are multiple reasons for this, and I'm stealing from other people's answers as well, just in my own journey of learning about this. I mean, I certainly can say that I think we're just used to working in this status quo kind of way, which gives it legitimacy. But again, if we really thought about it, I mean, but why? What is the legitimacy? Yeah, okay, there are some issues of transparency, like filing your taxes and sharing how you're giving and how much you're paying your executives. That sure, that's fine. We interact with the government in that way. But the whole application process, why does it have to be that way necessarily? And why couldn't there be more constructs like a common application, like a universally accepted one, that would overcome a lot of barriers? Like the capacity ones that I'd already named, but also cultural ones and geographical ones, things of that sort. So I think that your question is really important, and I think that we do need to provoke all stakeholders to think about that. We as NGOs who are participating in it, to feel disempowered maybe to challenge it so much, but maybe collectively we can do something about it. And we at Catalyst 2030 certainly have been doing things about it in our shifting the funding paradigm work and having an NG open letter saying exactly all of this, what I've just outlined. But I think funders as well, and I'm really glad to see that there are more and more funders who are open to change and changing the way that they operate by lifting onerous application requirements and reporting requirements and doing more relationship building and co-creating.
I wonder if maybe, for example, those foundations, which have had pretty onerous requirements, did it not because they were trying to make life difficult, but because they just didn't know any other way to do it. I mean, they're smart people, but that doesn't mean that they would suddenly have this awareness that, oh, wow, we can do it entirely differently from the way it's always been done. That's hard to ask anybody to do. So it sounds like that's one of the things that you're enabling through Catalyst 2030, because if you've got 2,500 organizations in 75 countries, actually, one question there is, how in the world are you finding them, or how are they finding you, so you can work together to address some of these issues?
I mean, we were co-founded by, oh, let me just back up quickly too.
Yeah.
And they also were, in terms of our enabling environment work, we are working with funders directly by through our donor learning group. And this is a monthly peer-to-peer learning group that meets monthly, I just said. And you know, we are entertaining different structures and formats for the actual meetings, but you know, we spotlight expert speakers who would be able to address issues and questions for this particular group of funders who are working directly at this intersect of philanthropy and systems change. So, you know, I'm really proud of the fact that there is such an appetite for this. We have more than 40 organizations who belong to who are on the mailing list of our group, and we have about 25 participants per month, and we have a handful who come month after month, and we have others who come in and drop in whenever they can. So that's something that I definitely wanted to put out there in terms of our work, as well as inviting any foundations or any funders who are interested in learning more. But sorry, back to your question.
Right. Well, no, I was just wondering how you all find one another. It sounds like in the case of the foundations, of the funders, I should say, that they talk to one another a little bit. Yeah. They don't all know one another. It's not a secret cabal. I mean, they're just people like the rest of us, but they do talk to one another. And so I suppose that they find a good place to have a productive conversation about change, and Catalyst 2030 is one of those places. That's great, but that's still very much one funder talk to another funder. And when you're and funders are a smaller community by definition, from the larger universe of NGOs and other social entrepreneurs. So how are you finding that network? How are they finding you? How are you finding them? How are you bringing those folks together?
That's a really good question. I mean, I should say that we were co-founded with Ashoka, Echoing Green, Schwab Foundation, Skoll Foundation, and all of these entities have their own networks. And so Catalyst 2030, Ashoka and Echoing Green in particular, and Skoll, they all have these fellowship programs. So it's been great that Catalyst 2030 has been able to kind of be a natural fit, a natural part of the journey of, okay, once the fellowship program is over, there's this cohort, the cohort can go on and belong to Catalyst 2030, widening their network and continuing their work through our movement. And there are other, I mean, we've been talking to other foundations that also have their fellowship programs who are really keen to tap into that. So that's one example of how our network is being built and developed and growing. But we also have a monthly General Assembly that we welcome interested potential members to attend. And I think that just by our growth, that demonstrates our pace of growth, that demonstrates quite an appetite for this sort of network and these sort of resources. So I think that word of mouth has been really critical. But we also, I mean, I've been really impressed with our membership team in terms of how deliberate they are in ensuring that members are actually engaged. I mean, the last thing that I really want to be doing is bragging about these big numbers. And in reality, it's a dormant mailing list, right? I mean, these are people who are active, or organizations that are active, and that is part of the pledge that we ask people to agree to. It's otherwise free to become a member. The application process is not onerous. We have a very easy, helpful 1 hour, 1.5 hour onboarding session. And then my membership colleagues, and they engage all of us too, fellow Secretariat staff members, to making sure that members are using the hub or engaging with some other aspect of the membership offering. So
Right.
I think that robustness helps us grow as well.
And the implication of a hub is that if there are organizations of different sizes and experiences and capacities in that space, that they could theoretically be, informing, advising, and supporting one another. And I'm bringing that up because we had a comment here in the chat, and I'm sorry for trying to summarize it, and I'm going to do this ineffectively. But it did make reference, this is from Hillary, who was making reference to some of the potential risks in, for example, universal applications. I mean, the one positive is what you just mentioned, Jane, but one of the potential risks of any kind of universality is that it may sometimes favor some of the larger organizations that are better at doing those things, even if it's something that seems fairly streamlined and is open to all. And so maybe the hub is another thing you could share. Have you seen examples either within Catalyst 2030 or within other organizations where you're creating more of a flat structure, so an organization can come in that just formed virtually yesterday and be sitting there alongside the Ford Foundation, to use kind of an absurd example?
Yeah, I love that example. But Hillary, that's such a fair comment in terms of the favoring of these large INGOs in particular. That's where I've seen a lot of murmurings whenever a big opportunity comes through the ether, and we have 3 very active WhatsApp groups. So this is not an unusual conversation. And just organizationally, my colleagues know that this is a problem, and they know that others see this as a problem. And I've heard our colleagues at TechSoup, they've referred to this as the compliance conundrum. And in fact, there was a session during our Catalyzing Change Week, and I'd be happy to share a recording of that, where they talked about this and they also had voices from the Hilton Foundation represented, as well as from the Global Fund for Community Foundation. I believe that's what they're called, based in Africa. They're a great organization, so apologies if I am getting the name wrong. But in any case, the issue is this due diligence process, right? And the fact that it can be quite onerous. And there were two sides of the coin, that there are funders, let's say in the global north, who are frustrated with applying to INGOs, knowing that this is not what I want to be doing. I really believe and know that there are people on the ground, the grassroots organizations, those are the real experts where my money will really go much further and make the difference that I want it to make. However, how can I find these organizations when they're so small and strapped for resources that they can't find me? So TechSoup with their STEP platform, Kuja Link is the name of the platform of Adesso, and StartPoint is a platform of the African Philanthropy Network. We might have a few other partners, but gathered them in what we're referring to as our compliance conundrum collaboration in order to address these changes or these problems, because they have these platforms in order to tackle exactly what we've been talking about, of making these matches and helping organizations overcome this due diligence process. And so we're trying to get them to join forces, to have an open dialogue, to bring in other partners in order to find solutions that are realistic and work. And yeah, I mean, when I say universal, it's not, I mean, we know this is also part of the reason how Catalyst was birthed. It's not all one size fits all. I mean, we recognize that too. So I think that there is a balance in terms of, there are complexities to finding the solutions.
Yeah. These conversations have been going on for so long. It's good to hear them brought into the bigger, a conversation that everybody can have. I mean, I remember going to this Civicus conference back in 1995, I think it was, in Mexico City. And you had people like, one of the members of the Rockefeller family right there, and Manuel Arango from Mexico, and that with organizations that were from Nigeria and all over Latin America and North America and Europe, finally talking together. And it wasn't perfect, but it was this conversation. But it didn't seem like anything was really happening. Maybe there was a lack of these platforms or hubs or networks that really facilitated some kind of real partnership. As you said, if groups like Ashoka, which have done brilliant work producing, facilitating fellowships, didn't have this next step, of a diving board to jump into the deeper end of the pool. And that's the role in part that you're serving with Catalyst 2030. That seems terrific. But then they're also still going to have to figure out how to raise money, which is what you're doing for Catalyst. But each of these organizations have to do for themselves. And I'm wondering, as you're talking with them, what are the main challenges that they have in just trying to find enough money to keep lights on, or, pay the staff, or whatever it is that they need to do?
Yeah, so it sounds, okay, so I feel like there are different questions that you're asking. I mean, are you asking me what the challenge is for raising money for Catalyst 2030, the network, or?
Both. Yes, the network, and then individuals who are in the network who are also having these problems, because I know you're not trying to compete with them. You're trying to help them, but they're on their own journeys individually. So yeah, what is it like for you? And
yeah, well, that's really insightful for you to pick up on, because I feel that I am navigating this tension of talking to funders and quickly assessing, okay, is this a funder for us, and or is it for somebody within our network, and who and how can I facilitate that in a way that's also going to be successful? And I mean, I think that for me, it's been a learning journey. I've only been with Catalyst for about 4 months. And it's, I think that I'm figuring out a way to present us and our case for support in a way that makes it clear that the funder who's interested in systems change, interested in locally led initiatives, that actually they should be funding us. But I find that being a network, there seems to be actually a sense of removal in terms of our role of actually doing the work, when in fact, I feel like we're the innovation, we're the accelerator. And yeah, you can still fund these other organizations fighting climate change directly. Sure, I mean, that's an opportunity, and let me introduce you to some of them. But I feel like actually the investment in the Secretariat is really is the big bet that's going to pay off. So this is my own lived experience as a fundraiser right now. Learning how to articulate this, and having the conversations with funders who really get it. I mean, they understand the importance of funding infrastructure and really value the work that we're doing as facilitators. But then the next sentence, we're not funding that right now. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's the eternal fundraiser problem, isn't it? Yeah. Well, we've got another factor too, and I don't know if you've run into this. You probably have, directly or indirectly, which is kind of the McKenzie-Scott proposition. I'm just making up that term, but the idea of trust-based philanthropy, where a funder decides, I'm just going to give money wherever I want to give it. There is no application process. That seems great. Then you've eliminated that roadblock, but it means that we don't necessarily know how they're making their decisions. And for some of us, we love what she's giving to. But my point isn't whether or not we support or do not support what she's supporting, but rather just the process seems pretty murky. And I'm wondering if in an environment like this, where we're trying to encourage people to work together and to support groups that are really working at the grassroots level, how you contend with that. I mean, are you running into that where we're encouraging trust and just go ahead and make that money available, but then well, if they're going to do that, they don't really tell you what they're doing, and there is no application, and there's no way to figure out what the secret sauce is? How is that for you as a fundraiser?
You know, I mean, I have to say that I'm of course a big, believer in trust-based philanthropy, in terms of, I guess, from the context of what I was describing before, just in terms of this power, I guess, the power structure that is so problematic in philanthropy, that maybe, that trust-based philanthropy, that it removes that, it does shift some of that. But I guess what you're describing too is also a lack of control, right? I mean, that we have a lack of control in the process in terms of just hoping that luck will find us, or
Right.
saying, "Oh, I heard that this guy from this consultancy, he's the McKenzie-Scott whisperer. He's whispering in her ear, and that's how that's where her giving strategy is coming from." And trying to figure that out, that's I find might become a wild goose chase as well. And then then what am I doing with my time, right? if I pursue this rumor. So I guess, yeah, I mean, that's a fair point, but I think I also have respect for the donor journey as well, right? I mean, I think that there is a bit of trial and error. I mean, I look at what the Chan Zuckerberg initiative has been trying to do as well. And I think that they've been pretty open about, okay, maybe this investment and this approach didn't work, but they're still going to be giving, and their giving is still important. And I think that we all need to be this is a reminder that we're all humans, right? And maybe we just need to be transparent about that learning, right? And maybe to another point that you were getting at in terms of the transparency and the approach, maybe that will be the greater service too. But I know that there is a report. There was a report authored by Panorama Global on McKenzie-Scott's giving and the effect that it's had on organizations. And actually, this Gabrielle was one of the presenters at one of our donor learning groups, one of the first ones that I attended at the start of Catalyst 2030. And the finding is that it didn't. I think one of the other fears is that, after an organization gets one of these gifts, that it makes it harder for them, or it shifts. They're not able to accommodate the gift. But I mean, they found that that's actually not true. So fear not.
Right. Yes, and that, and also the other fear that comes up or has been talked about, maybe just through the rumor mill, is if they receive a trust-based philanthropy gift, we won't keep focusing on one donor, that if there's a large gift, it seems disproportionate to the other gifts they've received in the past. It's still very welcome, but they might be shy about communicating that to the public because they think that the fear is that if they do, that other donors will think they don't need any support anymore. And so this is, again, one of these issues. But it would seem like all the transparency we can get would address some of this, because not always is more information leading to more understanding, but definitely less information does not lead to more understanding. So
Right.
transparency seems in principle like a pretty good idea. So that must be one of the factors here also, and maybe one that it leads to this issue about driving systems change. And before we discuss that, do you mind, for those of us in the particularly cheap seats, to just describe what you mean by systems change?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think just a very simple one sentence answer is really getting to the root of the problem, right? I mean, I think that, funding the building of toilets is one way of giving away money, but is it really solving the problem? Yeah, okay, it's providing the toilets for that community that needs them. But why are there no toilets being built here? Right, that it's not addressing that problem. And if we address that why question, then we'd be solving bigger problems, bigger issues that would help not just this one community, but a wider community, and oftentimes a whole country.
And so when it comes down to that, I'm thinking about the SDGs. And for those who haven't seen this chart, that would be a really interesting thing to see. So if, Jack, I don't know if you can look up a link to the UN's SDGs, the SDG goals, but if you can and put that in the chat, that'd be a nice thing as a reminder for those of us to see, because it's a big chart, and there's a lot of things that have been identified to address that are systemic problems around the world. And but in addressing them, I wonder if the methods of addressing them are also continually evolving, because there was a reason why a lot of people wanted to put toilets in communities that didn't have them. But then I'm sure, like water pumps is a great example of this, the play pumps, where they thought that would be a way to address it. It gives, it's a community activity, the children are engaged, they're generating water for the community. It seems like in some sense, it might be systemic. Now they have water. They don't have to worry about carrying a jug on their head 10 miles to try and bring water to their family. So which happens all over the world. And so I wonder if as you've dived into these things at the organization, but also working with many organizations, both in the last 4 months, but also over your career, if you're seeing that people are taking a more, hands-on approach, a deeper approach to systems change, that they're really looking at these problems in a deeper, richer, more impactful way.
I don't know. I feel like I'm encountering them more now because of my work. I feel that there are definitely philanthropists who have always, and then on the other hand, I know that there are philanthropists who have always been systems change oriented. It's just that we weren't calling them that before, maybe. And I just feel like it gets to the heart of donor motivation. It gets to the heart of the way people are. I think that maybe with more awareness, it just depends on your audience. I mean, some people really do care about the SDGs. They really do care that the world is burning and that these episodes are linked, and that they're linked to food security and gender inequality and other issues of social justice, etc. So then they're going to be interested in systems change. So maybe within that context and greater awareness, yes. But I've been wondering myself whether or not there's greater awareness in general towards this.
And again, you've been doing this stuff for a while now, working with different organizations long before Catalyst. And each of these organizations has their own mission and vision and their financial objectives and staff they want to support and people who've come through their doors. And those are all important. But I wonder if sometimes that must also be kind of frustrating, because you're seeing that puzzle piece and another puzzle piece, another. Maybe that's the opportunity with Catalyst, is to bring some of those together. But but especially after we've gone through this massive societal disruption, and now we're facing another one with the environmental crisis that none of us can avoid anymore. I mean, every article you read in The Guardian has at the end of the article a statement about how the world has changed. I don't remember anything like the New York Times ever doing that. It seems like now is a moment when people have to confront it, but it sounds like you're saying you're not sure that they've done that yet.
I think that what is that difference? They're hearing it, but are they necessarily listening? And are they actually changing? You know, I think that, and I know that what I'm speaking from a global North perspective as well. You know, the fact that we have a choice to ignore it, that is completely privileged by where we are and how we live, right? I mean, there are people who are living, whose lives and livelihoods are at peril, where they do not have a choice to care or do something differently because of climate change. So this, you know, I guess maybe that's, maybe there's a little bit of a note of frustration knowing that that's the reality, and that's something that I, you know, deeply confronted with much more in my work with Catalyst. And I think that that's part of my remit, right? To get more donors to be aware of this reality, that, you know, actually we actually don't have a choice to be complacent about where we are now.
Right. Well, so thinking about this from a very tactical perspective, which I know is hard because we were talking about big things. You also are making the case, as you said, for support for Catalyst 2030. You're talking with this large network of organizations that are making their own case for support. They're also trying to address these issues collectively, but also individually. And then over the years, you've been working with all these other organizations, with Global Philanthropic and others. So I wonder if you have now, in your mind anyway, some basic tactical responses when people say, how can I just get the resources I need to do this work? Are there some basic kind of advice that you give people in that first few minutes, essentially the fundraising elevator speech, so that you tell them it is possible for you to build the case, raise the money, and do the work?
So, I mean, you mean in terms of the fact that they don't want to hear the elevator speech and they just want to give money, or?
Oh, no, I'm thinking they probably need to hear your quick pep talk on how they're going to raise the money in order to get the mission done.
Right.
What kind of advice do you offer at this point to organizations that are facing these challenges?
Yeah, I mean, I think that for us, I mean, for my current organization, it really is that whole acceleration point and the emphasis on the collective. Because I think that people get distracted about with their, you know, the safety of status quo, as well as instant gratification, because, you know, you give money to an organization that is directly building whatever it is, you know, a shelter for women, or, you know, the toilet example, and that's a feel-good factor, or a scholarship for a student in need, you know, to come from the higher education context. You know, those are all great things. How can I argue with that? But I think that also so many donors are seeking innovation, and I feel that our approach is the innovation. And I think that, you know, the donors, people need that nudge to understand that, and to understand, I guess, and we have to make it easy for them to respond collectively, or to be a part of a movement, to, you know, to the ends, you know, we're the means to the end, the desired, the desired solution. So I think that making that crystal clear is probably the big challenge. You know, it's a necessity in terms of compelling the organization. I'm sorry, the donor to make it.
And maybe making this a little more personal for a second, because we jumped right over it. You talked about the disruptions personally of moving country to country, enlarging your family, making all these choices, which are, you're not alone in those, in encountering and navigating those disruptions. So as you talk to others who are going through those as well, what kinds of questions do you get, especially from other women in philanthropy and fundraising, and how do you talk with them about how you've managed that transition and how they can take heart? Because there's always not a lot of money in what we do, and there's not always a lot of pats on the back for it either, but you've found a way. What is that way, and how do you encourage others?
Well, I think in philanthropy, we have the skill of relationship building, right? I mean, that's how we successfully raise money, raise support for our organizations. And I think that that's something that you have to utilize to advocate for yourself, whatever it is that you want. And I think the other piece of that is to try to develop some resilience, which is really, really hard, especially when the road is really, really long and there are no apparent solutions or, ideas that come instantly. So I think that this is a piece of advice I picked up while I was doing informational interviews in San Diego when my family and I briefly lived there. And that was to build your own board of advisors. And I think that that's so nice in terms of addressing that we all have different strengths too. So you call on your mentors, your advisors, your advocates for different things. It could be a geographic one, or for somebody who can help develop your fundraising path in major giving, or just career pep talk in general, or how to get to the management table, or whatever it is. I think that was a really sensible piece of advice, to keep track of who those people are and keep in touch with them, keep them close to you, which I know is really hard when your life is not taking a path that corresponds with a linear career path. So I think that being open about that, and there are many more resources now too that I've encountered. I think one is called Path Forward. The other one is I Relaunch. And these are for returners, people who've been out of the workplace for more than 1 or 2 years for different reasons. And it's not just women who are caregiving, it's other people who've been serving in the military or going back to school. Although caregiving is probably the primary reason. And I really appreciate this acknowledgement and this movement towards recognizing that this is a legitimate reason to not have that consistency on the CV or the resume that we all feel like we have to pretend we have. So I think that this is all an acknowledgement that we're all human beings and compassionate human beings.
Thank you, Jane. If people want to be in touch with you, learn more about the work that you're doing now, and just follow your work, follow your story, how do they do that? How can they be in touch?
I would definitely welcome contact for sure. And probably LinkedIn is the best way to find me. So my name, Jane Park, is quite common, but maybe if you look for me with my middle name, which is Jane Joo Park, that's Joo Park. And also, I think I'm the only one in Germany. They're absolutely welcome to find me and connect with me there. And mentioning this conversation that we had, I would absolutely love to continue a private chat that way.
Well, and people can also find your latest post that was very kind, talking about all these people who worked, contributed to a book. Now, is this 12 years ago?
More. I can't remember.
Yeah. Wow. 2010.
Yeah.
I think that was it. Okay, time for another book.
You're not the only person who has said that to me. In fact, Mark Seidel, who's another person, I forgot to tag him on there, but he wrote the introduction or the forward. But he also said that. So I would love to work with Mark and with you again, Jay, on that. So maybe if Case is.
Yes. So if anybody from Case is listening, you're welcome to reach out to Jane and John. I'm sure, and get some help on a new book. I'm sure that we all benefit from that. And if you want to look up Jane, you can see her at, I think I see your profile as Jane J. Park. And yes, I don't know any other Jane J. Parks who are going to be in Essen in Germany, so you should be able to find her easily. Thank you so much for this, Jane. It's really great to talk with you in this way. I really appreciate your sharing.
Oh, Jay, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really pleased and privileged to have joined your esteemed roster of speakers in your podcast. And as I said before, it's always a pleasure to work with you and to speak with you.
The pleasure is definitely mine. Thank you so much. And we also have somebody coming up on Thursday who I know that Jane knows. And that's Ben Morton, right? So we have him coming in from as CEO of Global Philanthropic. And he will be talking with us right here in London live. So please do join me for that. That's on Thursday at 12 Eastern time. And we'll look forward to seeing you then. And then we'll return to the States where we have some content coming to you from the APRA conference in Indiana. That comes up just about 2 weeks from now. So be on the lookout for an announcement. And if you don't see those announcements come your way, all you have to do is look for the rest of the content calendar at DonorSearch, which is at donorsearch.net, where recordings of this and all the other sessions are housed along with their YouTube channel. So do check it out. And if you're interested in knowing more about your donors, and I sure hope you are, you can learn more about them there. So with that, we'll look forward to seeing you all sometime soon. Thanks again, Jane. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, Jay.